Here's the thing nobody wants to say out loud. When your avoidant person goes silent, when you're both in no contact and that deafening quiet has taken over, they are not as okay as they look. They're not sitting in unbothered peace. They're not scrolling through their phone with zero thoughts of you. And I know that's the story you've been telling yourself, because believing they're fine is easier than sitting with the uncertainty of not knowing. But it's not the truth. And here's the controversial part. The thing I genuinely believe that most people will push back on. Your avoidant person, during no contact, is not primarily experiencing freedom. Underneath everything, underneath the relief, underneath the silence, underneath all those deactivating strategies firing at full force, what they secretly want is so deeply human that it kind of changes the entire way you should be looking at this situation. They want to matter to you. Without having to say so, that's it. That simple. That devastating. And before we go deeper into what that actually means, I need you to understand something first. Because if you don't understand what's happening inside an avoidant nervous system before no contact, you'll completely misread what's happening during it. Avoidant attachment usually develops from emotional rejection and neglect from caregivers early in childhood. Avoidance and withdrawal become their strategy to protect themselves from more pain. That is not a character flaw. That's not them being cruel to you. That is a child who learned, really early, that needing people was dangerous. And that lesson got wired so deep into their nervous system that by the time they're an adult standing in front of someone who loves them, the alarm is still going off. The one that says, too close, too much, pull back. Deactivating strategies are basically patterns of thoughts and behaviors that reduce feelings of closeness when intimacy starts to feel uncomfortable. They operate automatically, often outside of conscious awareness, and their whole job is to quiet the attachment system when it gets activated. In avoidant attachment, closeness can register as a subtle threat rather than a source of comfort. You know what's wild about that? The longing doesn't disappear. It gets buried. It gets managed. It gets turned down like a volume dial, way, way down. So low that the person often can't hear their own longing anymore. But it's still there, playing underneath everything, quietly, constantly. Which, when you think about it, you've been reading their silence as indifference. And turns out it's actually the opposite. It's suppression. There's a difference between someone who doesn't feel and someone who has learned to not feel out loud. Big difference. So now you're in no contact. Maybe you initiated it. Maybe they did. Maybe it just happened gradually and neither of you officially named it. Either way, the silence is there. And here's where it gets interesting. The first thing an avoidant usually feels after a breakup is relief. They finally did the uncomfortable thing, ended the tension, can tell themselves it's over. And I want you to really hear this. That relief is real. It's not fake. It's not them not caring. It's their nervous system finally exhaling after months, maybe years, of feeling like closeness was something it had to fight against. So yeah, the relief is real, but relief is not the end of the story. It's barely the beginning. Because here's what nobody talks about. People with this attachment style lean hard into self-sufficiency and emotional distance on the outside. But underneath that, they've got a rich inner life, often full of fantasies and idealizations about relationships and intimacy. A whole inner world their outer behavior is hiding. From you, and honestly, from themselves. Once the relief settles, and it does settle, that inner world starts to surface. The memories come. As life moves into new routines, reminders bring the relationship back. A shared song, a familiar place, an anniversary, a joke, a hard day, some important moment. And suddenly there it is. Someone can miss companionship while still believing the separation was necessary. That's the paradox they're living in. Missing you and simultaneously convincing themselves leaving was right. Both things true, both things unspoken. And I need you to really hear this part, because this is the part that changes everything. They're not out there thinking, I don't miss them. They're thinking, I shouldn't miss them. Something is wrong with me for missing them. The avoidance relationship with their own longing is complicated in a way most people never see. The needs didn't disappear. They were always there, pushed below the surface to avoid the old pain of needing and not receiving. So, what do they actually secretly want during no contact? I'm going to give you several things. They're all layered, they're all honest, and none of them are things your avoidant partner would ever admit to you directly, maybe not even to themselves. First thing, they want to know you're not gone for good, without having to ask. The avoidant ex starts looking for signs they could still get you back if they really wanted to. They might check your social media, ask mutual friends how you're doing, find small excuses to mention you to others. They're not ready to reconnect, but they want reassurance that you're still emotionally available, just in case. Notice what's happening there. They don't want you to reach out, because reaching out would reactivate all the pressure they felt. But they want to know the door is still warm, that you haven't completely let go. Like, they need to know the light's still on, even if they're not ready to walk back inside yet. I used to think this was manipulation. I really did. I thought, this is them wanting their cake and eating it too. And honestly, part of that's fair. But the more I sat with it, the more I started to see it differently. What they're really doing is checking whether they matter to you. Not consciously, instinctively. The way a kid glances up from playing to see if their parent is still in the room. Second thing, they want to feel like they made the right call, even if part of them suspects they didn't. An avoidant ex often avoids consequences the same way they avoid closeness. If they can confirm you'd come back at the first sign of attention, it lets them stay in control of the narrative. But when you stay quiet and composed, they lose that. They start to realize emotional control has a cost, and that cost can be you. This is the part most content skips, because it's uncomfortable. They want their exit to feel clean, justified, like they did the reasonable thing, and your pain, while they genuinely didn't want to cause it, also served as a kind of confirmation that they mattered, that the relationship was real. When you go silent too, when you stop making their exit easy by chasing, something shifts. The story they told themselves starts to crack. Third thing, they want to be understood without having to explain themselves. When faced with intimacy, a dismissive avoidant might secretly think, I don't believe I can meet their needs, or they expect too much of me. Those thoughts aren't random. They're a kind of cognitive wall built to keep vulnerability at bay. Underneath all of that, underneath the I need space and the pulling away and the going cold, there's someone who is genuinely terrified they're not enough, that they'll fail the people they love, that if they let someone all the way in, the other person will eventually find something unlovable in there. Avoidants secretly fear inadequacy, not loudly, quietly, in the background of every single interaction. So, during no contact, what they want, and would never say, is to be understood anyway, to be seen clearly and not condemned, to be known for what's underneath the walls, not just for the walls themselves. Fourth thing, they want to feel the loss without having to act on it. They can feel the regret, the nostalgia, the quiet grief of no contact, and still not reach out. Because reaching out means admitting vulnerability. And admitting vulnerability is, to their nervous system, terrifying. Saying, I miss you might feel unnatural, forced, even dishonest. Even if they genuinely do miss you, they're not built yet for that kind of honesty. And that is not your failure. It's not a reflection of how much or how little you meant to them. It is the architecture of a wounded nervous system doing exactly what it was designed to do. Here's the part that I think is genuinely surprising, the part that actually changed how I see all of this. Research from Neuroscience shows that avoidant individuals show reduced limbic activation during emotional tasks, and meaning their brains are literally processing emotional closeness differently. And here's the wild part. Avoidants may have a different response to oxytocin, the so-called love hormone. While oxytocin typically makes people feel closer and safer, for avoidants it can sometimes trigger anxiety and a pull to withdraw. Their brain may actually suppress the bonding effects of oxytocin to maintain distance. Think about that for a second. The very hormone that makes most people feel more in love, that same hormone, can register as a threat inside an avoidant nervous system. They're not choosing distance over you. Their nervous system is firing alerts in response to the thing that should feel like home. That's not weakness. That's not cruelty. That's someone whose earliest experiences of love came wrapped in pain or unavailability, and whose body learned to brace itself every time warmth arrived. And here's where I need you to hold two things at once, because this is where a lot of people get lost. Understanding why an avoidant is the way they are does not mean you're responsible for waiting around while they figure it out. Those are two completely different things. You can have enormous compassion for someone's wounds and still recognize those wounds aren't yours to carry. That healing is slow work, relational work, and it can't happen through insight alone. You cannot incite someone into healing. You cannot love someone out of a pattern they haven't decided to face yet. So, what does all of this mean for you right now, in the silence? It means you're probably not being forgotten the way you fear. This is genuinely one of the most painful stages for an avoidant ex. They start feeling real regret and longing, but they still struggle to act on it. They feel things. They just don't know yet how to let those feelings move them toward you instead of away. But here's the question I actually want to leave you with. The one most people skip because they don't want to sit with the answer. What are you doing with your own silence? Because I've seen it so many times. Someone goes no contact and spends the whole time inside the other person's experience, wondering what they're feeling, trying to decode the quiet, waiting, monitoring, half living. And the irony, the quiet tragedy of it, is that you're doing in no contact exactly what you were doing in the relationship. Tracking them, managing the connection, making yourself small enough to not take up too much space. You're still organizing your emotional life around someone who is not here. Here's what I think is worth sitting with. The avoidant partner's most private question is often whether this is the life they want. One of competence and independence, where no one gets close enough to see all the way inside. That's their question to answer. That is their work to do. Your question, the one that actually belongs to you, is this. Have you started choosing yourself yet? Not as a strategy to make them miss you, not as a tactic to reactivate their feelings, but genuinely, for you, because you deserve a life that isn't suspended in someone else's silence. The avoidant secretly wants to matter to you without having to earn it. And here's what's painful and true and important all at once. You secretly want the same thing from them. You want to matter without constantly proving it. You want to be chosen without having to chase. You want to be loved without having to manage someone's fear of loving you. And that right there is everything. Not the no contact, not the strategy, not the waiting. The realization that what you've been longing for is something they're not currently able to give. And that your longing is not a flaw. It's a completely legitimate human need. The avoidant doesn't need to choose between connection and self-protection. They need to develop a nervous system that no longer experiences those two things as mutually exclusive. And that's genuinely beautiful to understand. It really is. But that is their healing to do. On their timeline. In their way. What you get to do, what no contact actually gives you, if you're willing to use it, is remember who you were before you started organizing yourself around someone else's fear. Remember what you want. Remember what you deserve, not in a bitter way, in a clear way, a quiet, steady, honest way. The silence is real. Their longing inside it is real. Your pain inside, it is real. And none of those things cancel each other out, but only one of those things is yours to work with, and you already know which one it is.